In 1962, Alcatraz was called the prison no man could escape. It stood on an island in San Francisco Bay. The water around it was freezing and full of strong currents. Guards believed no one could ever survive a swim to shore. On June 11th, 3 men proved them wrong, or so it seemed. Their names were Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers. That night, they broke out of their cells. They had cut through concrete with crude tools. They had left fake heads in their beds to fool the guards. They carried a raft stitched from stolen raincoats. By morning, they were gone. The guards didn't notice for hours. For more than 60 years, the world has asked the same question. Did they drown in the icy bay? Or did they escape to freedom? If they died, the rock proved its legend. If they lived, it became the greatest prison break in American history. This is the story of Alcatraz, the Great Escape, and the men who may have beaten the inescapable prison. In June 1962, Alcatraz went silent. The night count was routine. Guards walked past the cells. To them, everyone was asleep. But 3 beds were not what they seemed. On the pillows lay dummy heads. The faces looked real. They had hair taken from the prison barbershop. The skin was made from soap and plaster. Even under dim light, the fakes looked alive. The guards glanced, nodded, and kept moving. Nothing looked wrong. Hours passed. The prison stayed calm. But the truth was very different. Frank Morris and John and Clarence Anglin were already gone. Their beds were empty. Their cells were open. And the escape had begun. The trick worked. The guards did not notice until morning. By then, the trail was cold. The prison that claimed no one could ever break free had been fooled by soap, hair, and patience. The rock was no longer unbreakable. Next comes the part no one saw, the slow, secret work that made this night possible. In 1961, the work for escape began. The men had almost nothing, but they turned scraps into tools. A spoon became a chisel. A broken motor from a vacuum became a drill. Night after night, they dug behind their cell walls. The holes grew wider, hidden under cardboard. Behind the walls was a dark utility corridor. It became their secret path. But a tunnel was not enough. They also needed a way off the island. For months, they collected raincoats. More than 50 were stitched together by hand. They used prison glue, heat from pipes, and pure patience. The result was a homemade raft and life vests. The work did not stop there. They needed to trick the guards. From soap, toilet paper, and plaster dust, they shaped faces. From the prison barbershop, they stole real hair. The dummy heads looked alive under dim light. To guards, the men would seem asleep. Every detail mattered. And they found a place to build. On top of the cell block, hidden in plain sight, they built a workshop. From there, the escape plan grew. Alcatraz looked unbreakable. But inside, the tools, raft, and dummies were ready. Still, one piece remained, the part no tool could provide. Nature itself would decide if the plan lived or died. The men knew the water was their biggest enemy. San Francisco Bay was freezing cold. The currents were strong enough to pull swimmers under. Many believed no one could cross alive. But the prisoners studied the tides. They learned the water was not always against them. Between 11 p.m. and midnight, the current changed. Instead of dragging everything out to sea, it pulled north. That flow could carry a small craft toward Angel Island. It was a narrow window. Miss it, and the men would drown. Hit it, and the tide itself would help them. Their plan depended on this moment. The raft, the dummies, the tunnels, all of it came down to timing. Every detail had to match the clock. But with the window so small, there was no room for error. One mistake could kill them all. As the night of June 11th approached, tension grew. 3 men were ready to risk everything. But not all 4. One conspirator, Alan West, had worked on the plan for months. When the time came, His hole was too small. He couldn't get out. The others had to leave him behind. West was trapped in a cell, while Morris and the Anglin brothers moved forward. The escape would go ahead without him. The plan had lost a man before it even reached the water. On the night of June 11th, the escape hit its first failure. Alan West was supposed to go with them. For months, he had carved a hole behind his cell, but his vent was smaller than the others. When the time came, it jammed. West tried to push through. He scratched. He clawed. He kicked at the edges, but the gap was too tight. Concrete held him in place. His partners, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, waited. Time was running out. The guards could walk by at any moment, and the tied window would not last. West begged for more time. He tried to pry the hole wider with tools, but nothing worked. Minutes passed. The others had no choice. If they stayed, all would be caught. So they moved on without him. West was left behind, stuck inside his cell, helpless. He had spent months preparing, collecting raincoats, shaping dummies, and digging night after night. Now he could only listen as his friends slipped into the dark. It was the cruelest twist, to be part of the plan, but never see it happen. By morning, West admitted what he had tried and failed to do. The FBI later called him a witness to the escape. But the world still asked the question, without West, did the others succeed? Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers moved fast. They pried open the vent above their cells. One by one, they pulled themselves through. The men crawled across the roof of Alcatraz. The night was dark, the wind sharp. Guards were nearby, but no one noticed. From the roof, they climbed down a pipe to the ground. They carried their homemade raft and life vests. Each piece was stitched from stolen raincoats. At the shoreline, they pushed the raft into the water. Then they vanished into the bay. By morning, Alcatraz had its first real escape. The FBI moved in quickly. Search teams found traces of what had happened. On Cronkite Beach, across the bay, there were paddles, pieces of rubber, and even a homemade vest. There were also letters and family photos linked to the Anglin brothers. These clues suggested the men had at least made it across the water. But there were no bodies, no raft, no clear proof of success or failure. For the first time, the prison built to be escape-proof had no answers. The world waited for the FBI to decide what happened. So why did investigators declare the men drowned? The FBI led the manhunt for 17 years. Agents searched the bay, the shorelines, and nearby towns. They spoke with families, tracked letters, and checked every lead. But no bodies were ever found. In 1979, the FBI closed the case. Their verdict was simple. The escapees drowned. They pointed to the freezing water of San Francisco Bay. They argued the tides were too strong. They said the distance to shore was too far. And they reminded the public that no one had ever escaped Alcatraz before. To the FBI, survival was almost impossible. The official file listed the men as missing, presumed dead. For the government, the case was over. But not for the families. The Anglin family never saw the brothers again. No letters came, no calls, no proof of life. For them, the silence was its own kind of answer. Frank Morris's relatives were left with the same emptiness. The rock had swallowed 3 men, and their story. Still, doubts remained. There was no raft, no bodies, no clear proof of death. And over the years, experts kept asking, could the FBI have been wrong? Did later science reveal a different truth about the Great Escape? In 2014, a Dutch research team reopened the case. They worked at Deltarays, a lab known for studying water and tides. Using modern computers, they built a 3D model of San Francisco Bay. They fed in data about the currents, the winds, and the tides on June 11, 1962. Then they ran the simulation. The results surprised everyone. The model showed that escape was possible. If the men launched between 11 p.m. and midnight, the tide would have carried them north. The current could push their raft toward Angel Island. From there, the shoreline was within reach. But if they left too early, they would be swept out to sea. If they left too late, they would be dragged back into the bay. It was a narrow window, but it was real. The science made survival look possible for the first time. The idea that the men drowned was no longer certain. To many, it felt like the escape story had new life. For the families, it meant hope. Maybe the men had made it after all, but tides and simulations were only part of the mystery. Over the years, new clues began to appear. Letters, sightings, even photographs. Could these pieces prove that the Great Escape had actually succeeded? The mystery did not die with the FBI's file. In 2013, a letter reached San Francisco police. It claimed to be from John Anglin. The writer said he had lived for decades in hiding. He also said Frank Morris had died in 2008 and Clarence Anglin in 2011. The letter ended with a plea for help and medical care. Experts tested it, but the results were unclear. It could not be proven true or false. In 2022, the U.S. Marshals released new images. They showed what the escapees might look like if alive in their 90s. The faces were old, but still recognizable. The message was clear. The men were still fugitives on paper. Tips have never stopped coming in. Some claim the Anglin brothers lived in South America. Others say they returned secretly to the U.S., but no sighting has ever been confirmed. Decades have passed, and yet the trail still flickers with possibility. The prison is long closed, the guards are gone, but the names of Morris and the Anglins live on. So, did they drown in the bay, or did they beat the rock? The truth is still divided. The FBI closed the file, sure the men had drowned, but science and later claims suggest they might have lived. The escape-proof prison may have been beaten not by strength, but by planning, patience, and one perfect tide. 3 men vanished into the black waters of San Francisco Bay. More than 60 years later, no one knows where they landed. That night, the rock went silent. But did it also lose its legend? Maybe the real escape is not from Alcatraz, but from the certainty of ever knowing the truth. The Great Escape is both history and ghost story. It is fact, but also legend. It is a case that still haunts the waters of San Francisco Bay. There were no bodies. There were no confirmed sightings. What we have are only fragments. Paddles on a beach, letters without proof, faces aged by computers. The rest is silence. And in that silence, the mystery only grows. Alcatraz was meant to be escape-proof. Yet 3 men slipped away, leaving a question that has never been answered. Did they drown in the bay? Or did they beat the rock and vanish into the world? 60 years later, the file remains open in our minds, even if the FBI closed theirs. Subscribe for more untold stories, where fact meets myth and history never fully shuts its doors. And tell us, do you believe they drowned? Or did they win?